Well, children, it's the last day of school.
Yay!
Attention, everyone. This is Principal Skinner. I trust you all remembered to bring in your implements of destruction. Now let's trash this dump. Somebody put a torch to these permanent records.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the NEETwork, the podcast for all things NEET. I'm Theo, and with me, as always, is my friend Dexter.
Hello, everybody.
And as for the NEET news, I have a little something related to the subject of the episode. After about a year of normie parents being forced to homeschool their kids, schools have reopened from summer for what is a hopefully normal school year with COVID precautions in place.
I'd imagine that this last year, 2 years, has been a little bit enlightening for parents. Maybe some have found a new calling, some have found that they prefer homeschool, and some have found that they absolutely hate their kids.
You bring up an interesting point with some people finding maybe they prefer homeschool, but that second point is interesting because I forget exactly which town it was, but a town kind of nearby me actually really pushed hard to get kids back into public school because what they found was that since the homeschooling thing happened, child abuse actually skyrocketed.
Actually, I have a thing for that. One of my friends that I work with was telling me about this. His wife works in not secondary education, but she basically helps children who are in maybe not so great homes. She's kind of like a social worker for the school, but she also teaches mentally handicapped children as well.
I see. Okay.
And he was telling me about school is an escape for a lot of kids, which is a really unfortunate reality.
And yeah, that is a very interesting point that we're about to absolutely trash talk education this episode, but for a lot of kids, school is a way to get away from a pretty bad life.
I actually really enjoyed high school for all it was worth. It was probably one of my most social times in life.
Yeah. I think my high school experience was better than my middle school experience, but still not great.
Well, isn't everybody's middle school experience awful?
Probably.
That's the pubescent era, right?
I guess I'm absolutely not thinking about what other people's experiences are in middle school. I was perfectly content just to think about myself.
I know that it's not uncommon for people to hate middle school. I'm pretty sure that's the most common something that most people have in common is they loved elementary school. It was a lot of fun. Absolutely despised middle school. And then kind of want to go back, kind of enjoyed high school for what it was.
I think for a lot of people, it's they would want to go back and relive high school with the perspective that they have now.
I definitely wouldn't mind doing that.
Yeah, same.
What do you think, faithful listeners? Leave a comment.
And I guess if that's all the news we have, let's do our shill of the week. If you'd like to support us in a more personal way, consider contributing to our Patreon at patreon.com/neetworkpod. Your kind contribution goes toward paying for guest appearances, paid promotion, membership to various podcasting services. With what's left over, we might just buy ourselves some chicky tendies.
As was mentioned earlier, we are talking about public schools. We're going to stop short of college and talk about K through 12 and how it's maybe not necessarily for you.
Right. We've spent a lot of the podcast's run so far criticizing the system of employment, and tonight we are going after a new target, the institution that is arguably more unassailable than employment, which is the public education system.
Well, you have way less options when it comes to public school, you know?
That's true.
You're guaranteed to take these classes. You might get a choice in a couple of others.
Right.
You can't opt out.
Sort of. We'll get to that. Culturally, to normies, education is probably one of the most important institutions of a nation. And to many, we just talked about it, the time they spend in education is their best years of life before they have to begin work as a wage slave. And that's not just high school, that includes university years. Depending on, I guess maybe from person to person, some people preferred high school, some people preferred college.
I definitely wish I made more of both of them.
Absolutely.
Like I feel like I was just a little bit too narrow-minded at the time to really enjoy it for what it was.
I'd say I had about a similar attitude. I wish I'd learned more, perhaps useful things in high school rather than like just how to play D&D really good.
Everyone wants practical experience. I learned how to play Magic in high school, and I got really good at it.
Damn.
And then I haven't played since because
Right.
all my like lunch buddies are gone. I also learned how to play hacky sack in high school.
Hacky sack. Yep, that's a big one.
You know, I was that kid at lunch.
Maybe this has actually gone down. Teacher used to be a really prestigious job, but it might not actually be that anymore. And teachers were kind of seen as like the people in charge of shaping the future as they educate their young pupils with the facts that are almost certainly useful in their careers as office drones or burger flippers.
Is it really useful though? I mean, public schools become like a very bloated thing. There's a lot of subjects that really don't have a lot of real world relevance, and just in general, a lot of useless information.
Right. Well, I am being sarcastic, but also, yes, you are right. And this is kind of the idea that the public normies hold rather than the truth. And the truth is, education is pretty much nothing more than a camp for indoctrination into normie-ism, using outdated teaching methods to condition children into obedient factory workers.
There is definitely a place for a standardized kind of teaching system. I'm not even faulting the standardized teaching system that we go with. There's just too many variations of people to really pull off a successful tailored experience in teaching.
That is the thing about the standardization, right? I've heard teachers tell me in lessons like, "Oh, there are 3 different ways of learning. There's the kind of person who has to do something to learn it, the kind of person who has to hear something to learn it, and the kind of person who self-studies," and I think maybe there was a couple others. But then all of the education you get is basically a lecture.
Right. I know some teachers try to vary it out a little bit.
Yeah, there are definitely teachers who try to mix up the formula. A friend of mine tells me about a history teacher of his who actually like dressed up as the people he was trying to teach about and like got into character and taught that class, and that sounded fucking cool. I never had any teachers like that.
I had a teacher in high school, an anatomy and physiology teacher. One of the coolest teachers I ever had. To get us more engaged, they had us kind of pick out things that we found really interesting in physiology. So for me, it was diseases. I thought diseases were really interesting.
That's cool.
And we would basically, it would be kind of like writing a report, but it'd be more of a presentation on that particular disease that we picked out, and we'd deep dive in it.
Okay.
That was cool as heck. I really enjoyed the disease diaries.
I suppose I've had a similar experience. I remember once in middle school, yeah, we had to like choose a disease and write a report on it. But I can't say I've ever had a teacher who like allowed you to kind of tailor your own lesson. Like as long as you were kind of meeting the standards, you could learn what you wanted to learn. I've never had that experience in school.
Really?
Yeah, it was pretty much always like maybe you could choose the subject, but it had to be within this circle or something like that. But never you got to pick.
It was kind of interesting. It had to pertain to anatomy and physiology, which, I mean, we picked that elective, so of course it had to, right?
Mm-hmm.
you have a bare minimum of interest in this subject.
Right, but that's a huge that's like a real wide net to cast. So you could have picked a whole bunch of different things.
Some people picked things like muscle movements and
Yeah.
like workout,
Mm-hmm.
like routines and the muscle groupings that it affects. Some people picked bones. Like, it was really interesting watching everyone pick different things.
Right. And I can't say that's ever happened to me. And kind of getting back to this idea of the standardized education, on one hand, I kind of understand that we have to standardize it to some extent because some level has to be applied to it. This is like a government institution and they need to, I'm not quite sure what I'm trying to say here. They need to standardize it, right?
They need to have some kind of scale of which to grade to.
Right, but at the same time, humans are not factory made.
And another thing to think about is humans are not factory, but you also have to have a certain degree of structure because sometimes way too open of classes are actually a challenge for students as well.
Yeah, okay. Actually, you kind of made the point I was trying to make is you don't want it to be too loose because maybe if you make it too loose, students will choose nothing at all. But at the same time, humans aren't factory made. So I think at least in our government has chosen the one extreme of a kind of factory approach to teaching.
Well, I kind of hate to say it, but some people are destined to be normies.
Yeah, some people are. I don't know. I guess the closest term I can think of is like a genetic predisposition to normie-ism, even though that's certainly not what it is.
And the schools are catering to those people.
Right. And I might even go as far as to say I was kind of like that as a kid. I very much bought into the normie narrative as we call it.
I mean, I'm willing to argue that that is a majority of people, and then once they become disillusioned with, one thing or another is when they kind of start to break the mold.
Yeah, that's interesting. That'll be something we'd have to think about is like at what point is a NEET created? The NEET origin story. Interesting. Yeah, we'll have to do an episode about that at some point.
Rise of the Planet of the Neets.
NEET strong, NEET together. But yeah, how did we kind of get here? How did our education system form into what it was? And education goes basically all the way back through human history. I mean, we talked about it in the last episode, but the Western education system, the one that is practiced basically all over the world, but with a few variations here and there, largely finds its roots in a little country called Prussia, which is now generally referred to as Germany, but because of very complex geopolitical situations, they're not exactly the same.
Oh man, those freaking Germans.
Those crowds.
Gotta ruin it for everyone else.
They're with their bratwurst and their zeppelins.
At least they have Oktoberfest.
Oktoberfest is cool. I do like that. I like me some wenches with huge tankards.
I like me some big tankards too.
Yeah. Just full.
Absolutely.
Frothing.
Just dripping.
And I would say that Prussia, at least before this era, most education was the kind that you paid for. If you weren't paying for education, you were probably just being taught day-to-day skills by your parents. But Prussia was the first time that the government kind of got together and decided, you know what, we're going to put a bunch of money into educating our public. And this is where we get a lot of the traditions in modern schools, such as saying the Pledge of Allegiance or referring to teachers as Mr. whatever their name is or Mrs. whatever their name is.
We could definitely see like the dawn of a standardized system here. The idea that you're paying for your education, of course, is a little different from modern day, which might actually make people value it higher than it is now.
Maybe.
In modern times, having a high school degree is a given, right?
A high school degree might not even be bottom standard anymore. It might be a bachelor's nowadays.
A lot of higher employment wants some kind of bachelor's or some kind of degree path,
That's
but it
true.
doesn't necessarily require it as long as you have years of experience.
Back to Prussia, though. Following Prussia's defeat by Napoleon, the country sought to reform itself pretty much from the ground up. And what they kind of came to was that they believed with proper conditioning that you could engineer the perfect citizen. And the largest goal of these reforms was to condition for obedience and conformity while giving the kind of illusion of choice for their citizens to become workers or soldiers.
Actually, I can see a time and a need for something like this back in the industrial era. There's a lot of things changing very quickly that needed a lot of standardized people. It just the only problem with it is it never seemed to evolve from this point.
Yes, the world is different now than what it was, 200 years ago, but it seems like every other year the world's an almost entirely different place. So education just can't keep up, and that's one of the biggest problems people are having with our currently outdated school system.
Right, and that's definitely going to be something I'm going to touch on in a future episode when we talk about colleges
Right.
and learning new sciences. But I find it funny the topic of engineering the perfect person.
Hmm.
Schools can't feasibly do that. I don't think it's possible. Students spend far more time at home with their families than they do at school. I mean, granted,
I disagree. I think it's actually the opposite.
a lot of their awake time is at school, but they don't have like that one role model. They split it up among like 8 different role models, right?
Right, they'd have a handful of role models.
Whereas at home, they have a devoted set of role models that roughly shape their worldview.
I would think that like parents do make an attempt to impart their own viewpoints on their kids, but I've heard many stories that parents don't even know what their children are learning at school, and there's actually like a lot of nefarious stuff being taught to kids that the parents just don't even know about until it like gets sprung on them that this is happening. One example I can think of was when they were going to take I forget which grade it was, but they were going to take a class of, I think it was like first graders to a sex shop. And the parents had no idea this kind of stuff was being taught in the school right up until they received the permission slip to take their kid to what is essentially a dildo store.
That's a little shocking.
What else is trying to be pushed on these people's kids that we don't even know about?
There's been several controversies since like 2000
Hmm.
about like schools teaching something parents don't necessarily like.
Right.
Like that's not new.
Yeah, and the consensus nowadays is that it's largely left-leaning ideas, but the right wing has done this a few times where they try to get like religious ideas taught in schools. It's not a
Bible studies and things.
Bible study type stuff. It's not a left or right thing. It's just kind of like whatever party is culturally in charge is trying to get their stuff taught in schools.
Neither of them is really beneficial to the modern day person.
But is it really any surprise at all that modern education is founded on authoritarian principles?
No, not really. I mean, again, I said it earlier, there was a time when this stuff was necessary.
Maybe. I don't know if it's not unnecessary, but I think the extent to which people want to take it is
During,
maybe taking it too far.
I mean, when what became a standardized approach was during the Industrial Revolution, I'd assume, is when it became widely adopted.
Right. Well, in America, yes, more widely adopted in the 1800. There was some diplomatic lobbying, but a lot of the lobbying was done by industrialists.
I'm willing to argue that it was kind of necessary at that time because those machines would literally destroy a kid if they weren't kind of programmed to use it.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's let's see, that was the 1800s, pretty much all throughout, even like the 80s. A lot of students were essentially being conditioned into being factory workers. And when you think of a public school as a kind of factory environment, things start to line up. We're told to arrive on time, which, not going to lie, kind of makes sense. To sit in designated areas, and most of all, a system of bells directs us where to go and what time we're allowed to rest. and what time we're allowed to eat and what time we're allowed to go home. And this is essentially how you run a factory. People in the factory are supposed to be as mechanical as the machines in the factory.
Granted, a lot of them have kind of fallen out of practice, but things like auto body shop,
Yeah,
woodworking, a lot of these kind of practical crafting jobs, for carpentry.
they did teach like auto mechanics in school, which I'm not gonna lie is actually a pretty good. I'd say that's actually a good and useful class. My school had an auto body or an auto mechanic class right up until the year I joined, and I had to take photography.
I'm willing to argue that auto body has kind of fallen out of popularity though,
Right.
with the advancement of cars and electronics in general, because modern cars require you to take them basically to their vendor to fix them because they're the only ones that have the unique tools or sub skills to actually fix them. And back in the day, every car roughly had the same idea behind building it, right?
Yeah. You need like special software and very unique tools.
Unique parts. I mean,
Right.
everything is kind of fashion made for that one car.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see why that's fallen out of popularity, but I can't see why things like welding, woodworking,
Right.
I can't see why things like that fell out because I think those are also good skills to have, but
Absolutely.
they're just not as popular. In fact, the most woodworking I did in college was in an art class.
I did take a shop class in middle school, and that was pretty interesting. I made like a little shelf. But would you say like the system of public education is kind of designed to squash qualities like creativity and individualism and self-motivation out of someone?
Yeah, I would say that. That's kind of the standardized approach, right? You always hear the story of like people are like animals. Some people are like fish, some people are like gazelles, some people are like jaguars. And only one group can climb a tree, only one group can swim, and only one group can run really fast, right?
I've I've heard that in less words, but yes.
Effectively, people are kind of really good at certain things, but we basically force them all to climb a tree.
Oh yeah, well that's what I was going to get at was the way I've heard this is if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, the fish will grow up believing it's stupid. But I would even say like qualities like creativity and entrepreneurialism and stuff like that are actually highly sought after today and allow people to employ themselves if they want to.
Yeah, it's really funny actually. A lot of modern business approaches, like from say Google,
Mhm.
I know Amazon does it to a degree, not fully embraces it, but a lot of progressive businesses actually prefer the rule breakers, since it kind of brings new opinions and ideas to the table that could potentially break the mold for the better.
I mean, I've never applied to Google as a job, but would you say like in let's say a job posting, are they specifically looking for that kind of person? Because I can't say I've ever seen like a job posting that said, we want a rule breaker.
So they're not going to say like a rule breaker. They're going to say things outside the box
Okay, yeah, they'll use that kind of term.
because rule breaker has a negative connotation, but things outside the box has a more positive kind of meaning to it.
Right. You can always spin it around, can't you?
Exactly. The thing about Google's approach is, at least for their software developers, for example, they kind of give you a standardized idea. Oh, hey, I want you to make a program that does this in X amount of time, right? And then you have that amount of time to do it, but it's programming. There's like a million answers. They're always looking for a more clever approach than what they would have thought.
Someone who can think outside the box, as it were. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Huh.
And so you get things like that. And then, of course, Google just likes to make things super crazy and wacky.
Right.
So they always are thinking of something new to do.
Well, Google actually isn't it Google or Facebook that allows its employees actually like to take hours of work into their own personal projects?
I I want to say it's one of those.
Okay.
I know that they have a really kind of interesting workspace. It's real comfortable. And a lot of them don't even work in offices. They kind of just work in public areas. Not public, but in like recreational areas
Mhm.
within the Google premise.
Interesting. I guess like in order to kind of bring it back to the topic of conversation.
As much as I hate to say it, the saddest thing about it is the system works.
It's certainly good at creating normies, that's for sure.
Right.
There has been quite a bit of I don't know if I'd call it pushback, but people are pushing against the outdated model of education more so in the modern day, and it's really no surprise that an education system nearly 300 years old doesn't adequately prepare people for living on their own or even necessarily make them smart. We talked about it a little earlier. Educators work by systematically reciting information to students and then relying on the students to recite that information back to them. The system values memorization over actual learning and understanding. And
I think that there is value behind kind of practicing your memorization skills. There
Mhm.
are some things that really do benefit from being able to memorize.
In my youth, I kind of talked to my parents about this. Is like this, all of this work is bullshit. It's just it's just work for the sake of work. And they're like, yes, we know it's bullshit, but you need to do it anyway.
How am I supposed to count cards if I can't memorize
Right? I, I would sure like to be able to count cards. That'd be cool.
them?
Today, we have the standardized system of education, but we also have all these standardized tests. And most schools have learned essentially they can hack the system not by teaching students to actually be smart, but they're teaching students only the stuff that they're learning on the standardized test. Uh, and since school funding is tied to performance on these tests, it's honestly like kind of the meta of schooling for these schools to only train their students how to take the test and don't do anything else.
A lot of these tests are decided by your governor, by what you really what they think you need, right?
Hmm.
So, of course, a lot of your tests are going to have things that are kind of practical skills, like your reading and your math, and then they're going to have a lot of things that are really unnecessary, like the social concepts and things.
I suppose. My experience with these standardized tests was that it was a lot of reading and math, which is fine. In my college education, I actually did read a book called Read Aside, which goes over the idea that the way that we teach literacy to students is actually killing their motivation to read. And yeah, that's actually my college experience where I was an English major and reading these actually incredibly boring books has killed most of my motivation to read anything at all. I don't want to read literature ever because I read exactly maybe 2 books that I actually enjoyed and everything else was just nonsense or propaganda even.
Right. I mean, I'm just starting to get back into reading things again.
Uh-huh.
And for the longest time, I hated doing it. In high school, it broke me. All of like, Shakespeare's a great author. He does a lot of great things. Um, To Kill a Mockingbird is a great book. But back to back to back to back, I think the only book that I really truly enjoyed in high school when I was reading it was Grendel.
Speaking of Shakespeare, did they make you read Romeo and Juliet like literally every year of high school like they did for me?
We read it twice. We read Romeo and Juliet twice. We read King Lear. We read Shakespeare. Not Shakespeare. Hamlet multiple times. One of the books that we read that I absolutely despised was Heart of Darkness.
We didn't even read Heart of Darkness. Like I said, I'm not exaggerating when it was Romeo and Juliet every year. And I think the one other Shakespeare play we read was Julius Caesar, which actually is my favorite one. But I have no desire to read King Lear or Hamlet or A Midsummer Night's Dream just because Romeo and Juliet killed any opinion I would have had over Shakespeare. I suppose like relating it back to what we're talking about with this standardization, like the only reason I actually remember as much of Romeo and Juliet as I do is because we read it so many times and it left such a bad impression on me. You kind of remember the things you hate more than the things you love. After this test is over, after the standardized test is over, multiple studies show that students forget at least 90% of what they've memorized in just 3 days. The point I'm trying to get at is that these grades and test scores are not really indicative of intelligence, and I would say the straight A student is really more of just someone obedient and follows instructions well, not necessarily that they're intelligent, although they could be.
Well, that was a little bit harsh. I was a straight A student in college. Though admittedly I was a pretty student in high school.
I was the same in high school. Well, I was a Midland student basically in both college and high school, and I would say yes, the same principles apply to college, maybe depending on your major. You're in more complex subjects that where a grade is more indicative of your intelligence. But say for math, like math is really just following the instructions until you come to an answer. If you remember how to do the problem.
But really there's really no excuse if you know how to do it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No point in not doing it, right?
Yeah,
I will say I think one reason why I took college way more serious was because it was on my dime.
that's true. That's true. I wasn't going to college on my dime. I was on the GI Bill until it ran out of money.
Yeah, I was paying for it all on my own, so I had to take it seriously. Couldn't afford not to.
Right. And I'm not really sure how true this is, but there's a kind of cultural myth that the straight A student is often the one who ends up working for the middle and B and C students. And the fact that most of history's greatest leaders and entrepreneurs and creatives were the people who dropped out of school says a lot about the value of the systems version of education.
So actually, I'm not so sure about that. Really, the way you grow in a kind of corporate setting, so to speak, is you got to know how to talk.
Maybe more than any other skill, probably in our modern day, charisma is the biggest one.
Yeah, I max out my charisma stat.
You sure did. But our schools don't teach that. Our schools don't teach us how to, like, talk to people and relate to people.
Right. I mean, all the school really does to help with that is they group you up with a whole bunch of people of like age and thus probably similar thinking, which is kind of how I made the most out of college. I think, yeah, the most valuable thing I attained from high school that you couldn't attain from like homeschooling is like I learned how to talk to people without pissing them off. And I think that's helped me countless times throughout my life.
I guess an argument against this myth would be like these people like Bill Gates and I think Elon Musk and a couple other people's the rich dad from Rich Dad Poor Dad. They say, oh, these people dropped out of high school, but how many of these like great leaders and entrepreneurs and all that just completed college and it's not considered like a big deal because these people are expected to have completed college, right?
It's just they had the money, they had everything available to them, so why wouldn't they? College is effectively a business, so as long as you keep paying, you keep getting chances.
Pretty much.
College is a pay-to-win school system.
Pay to win. That is the absolute best way I can think of it, of how to describe it.
I know that we've been talking about weaknesses of the school system and how it's outdated, but we haven't really suggested any like updates or changes that could make it better. Yeah, do you have any ideas?
Well, there was the idea you came up with, and that's like allowing students to teach themselves what they want. And I'm just a guy, I have no idea how to get them to do this, but like maybe instead of forcing them to learn a bunch of things that aren't necessary to really learn, um, or that aren't really necessary to know, emphasize more their own talents and interests, right? As well as less school. I think going to school for fewer hours a day, I think would really help, honestly.
Right. Yeah, I'd maybe lower it down to like a 6 hour instead of an 8 hour a day thing. My high school did some really interesting things. I really enjoyed it. Uh, I would maybe focus on a system that like focuses the absolute bare minimum of needs for like a functioning society member, something like mathematics, reading, English, the relevant skills that everyone needs to be able to do.
The basic reading, writing, arithmetic, those guys. We shouldn't really get rid of those because
History is important too, and source sciences. I would say like those two can kind of.
I would say like a Cliff Notes run through of those things would be probably better. Maybe like let's just say like maybe turn those into half classes.
If they want to focus on it, they can focus on it.
Exactly. You could almost even do a kind of major system for high school. In fact, that might be the best solution. Instill a college-like system of study or like an area of study into high school so the students are learning exactly what they want to learn with gen ed type stuff.
I know my high school did something really interesting with its elective courses
Mhm.
where it would actually do community outreach. which I thought was really cool. So
Right. We did that too, I think.
one of my graphics courses would reach out to the community of small businesses, and if they needed like graphics, we would effectively get real world like critique and real world skills.
Oh, that is actually quite cool. That is cool. That contextualizes what you're doing in high school. For my school, it was the curriculum was like so many hours of public service, I think it was, and I did that by volunteering for a summer at my local boys and girls club, which is fine, I guess. I don't use maybe I do. I kind of like know how to deal with kids to some extent, but it's not like I do it that much anymore.
I think that it would be really valuable. And here I am making a case against the neat lifestyle, right? Telling people go in early, meet up with local businesses, things like that. But
Yeah.
I feel like that's a quick way to learn a lot of skills and a lot of thinking really quick.
Well, like you were talking about graphic design, that is absolutely a hustle you could do and be self-employed doing. You don't need to work for a company and do graphic design.
Right. You could do graphic design as a freelance thing and make your money on the side. And that's why I think setting up an electives course that does a lot of community outreach is really important. And that's kind of how I would redo high school personally.
But as far as like things that currently exist, the only like alternative I can think of is some kind of homeschooling, which I did do for my last 2 years of high school.
I know that like what I just suggested isn't necessarily like infallible. It's very limited by what's available in your community.
That's true.
Maybe having like a wider basis elective grouping.
Uh-huh.
You have like a bunch of really big businesses that do have the resources to basically look through these kinds of things, and effectively a nationwide remote learning system for it.
Remote. Interesting. Okay. I guess we are embracing remote learning nowadays a little bit more.
So like instead of learning from your local community, you could even learn from an international business.
Interesting. Yeah. That could be something that could be
A-
done.
And yeah, you get a little bit of outreach from those. Of course, here I am basically employing slave labor from high school students.
Right. Or maybe the student isn't actually working so much as I don't know. I don't know how that system would exactly work.
It's kind of like shadowing, I guess. You're
Shadowing. Yeah, yeah. Not quite an intern, but yeah, a shadow would be a good word for it.
But I think if I'm going to be required to go to high school anyway, I might as well make some really interesting connections. That's kind of what I think. I kind of want to get a feel for like what the audience thinks would be a good idea.
Absolutely. Leave
Like
20 comments,
leave a 10-page written essay on what you think would be a good way to rearrange high school learning.
right? But you're bringing up a lot of stuff that I'm finding pretty interesting. You and I are pretty separate in age, so I'm curious to know how my experience in school differs from yours.
Well, as you just heard, we did community outreach. I did have my 4 required courses, of course, every year, but we also got like pretty good elective choices as well.
I'm hearing like all kinds of language choices. When I was in high school, it was like Spanish, German, French. And I'm hearing like Chinese, I'm hearing Japanese for high schools nowadays.
I wish my high school was brand new when I got it. So, and it was like in a medium-sized area of Texas. So we had like Spanish, and then we had like a level 1 French course, I think, but that wouldn't be enough to hit your bare minimum of 2 years of language. Basically, everyone learns Spanish.
Hell, like I live in what is essentially a cluster of small towns, and in the kind of hoity-toity town, it's still a small town, but like those kids were learning Mandarin Chinese and were going to take a trip to China, and I learned about that when I was kind of putting together my stuff for a Chinese visa. Did your school have career day?
Uh, Career day.
So like on TV, what I've seen is like usually there's like career day episode where a high school character will bring their parent in and then the parent will talk about whatever they do, but I never had that in high school.
What we had was like school tours. It was kind of like an election fair.
Interesting.
We would show off what we were working on in class, and then like anybody could just kind of walk in and look around.
Huh. I'm kind of talking about like my school was like there was always a day that the army would show up and do like a big recruitment thing.
Gotta get their gotta get their cheap
Got to get their conscripts right out, or conscript is not the right word, but got to get their people right out of high school that aren't moving on to college right out of the gate. Now, the whole like people's parents coming in and talking about what they did never really happened in my school, but sometimes we'd take a day off to like go to a computer lab and take all these aptitude tests where the test was kind of like a personality test that would supposedly present you with your ideal career. And I remember once the test told me that like sailor would have been one of my ideal careers, which given that I kind of romanticize piracy makes a little bit of sense,
interesting. Mine told me I'd be a Somalian pirate.
right? I am the captain now. But the other thing that kind of sticks out to me now that I think about it is not even once is the idea of owning your own business brought up.
No. A lot of times you'll see things like entrepreneur, but
I don't even think the idea of entrepreneurship came up. Like self-employment was simply not discussed in these career aptitude uh, days or whatever it was.
really,
Or even just like the idea of, oh, I make my money investing my money in the stock market, stuff like that. That was never brought up. The stock market itself was not brought up a single time in all of my schooling. I had to go learn that myself.
let me think. I remember taking one of these aptitude tests, but I remember it made such little impact on me
Mhm.
that I pretty much basically forgot it until you mentioned it.
Right. And I guess speaking of not learning how to do investing in the stock market, they never teach us how to do things that we're going to do in our adulthood like our taxes. But we sure do know that lava is called magma when it's underground, or that mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. We know those things.
Nice meme. Don't you ever say anything bad about the mitochondria ever again.
Well, I'm trying to think of something clever to say, like mitochondria is in all of us, something like that.
Yeah, well, I'm about to show you the powerhouse of my fist if you keep saying that.
We talked a while ago about like how the whole like if you judge a fish based on its ability to climb a tree. So we're all judged based on our skills in math and writing and science, and we're punished if we're not skilled enough, despite many of these things not being useful for day-to-day living.
Okay, hold up. I will say your core math is really useful. Division, multiplication, addition, subtraction.
Sure.
Reading and writing, very important. But like algebra 2, trigonometry, these are things that are, maybe fit more for an engineering.
I don't even get to algebra true. 2. I think I did a trigonometry thing for a particular project that was very, very specific, and I'll probably never do it again.
Let me think. I did algebra 1,
Hmm.
algebra 2 and geometry, trigonometry, and then pre-calculus.
So my point was that, we're punished for not being skilled enough in those things, but if there's something such as music or athletics or art, you're not punished for not being skilled in those things. They just say, "Oh, well that's not your thing," despite those things being just as valid career choices.
I think it's because a lot of those are subjective. Because I've seen some really god awful art that has made it very far. Now, is it a money laundering scheme or is it actually like some kind of hidden meaning? I don't know.
It's basically an open secret that the art community is a money laundering scheme. But like, let's just take the person who really did use art as their career. They're making money making art, and that's a career. If you're an artist who isn't making money, it's somehow not a real job. But then when you're making money doing it, then it suddenly becomes a real job. Or just like, the athletes, the high school athletes that go on to play professional football or baseball or whatever, or the musicians who go on to become professional musicians. Like all of those are extremely viable career choices, but we're not judged based on those things in education. We're not punished if we're not good enough musicians.
I gotta wonder how much some of these artists make. Like, for example, one that I've always wondered about is Banksy.
I don't know who that is.
He's a graffiti artist,
Interesting.
and a lot of his graffiti is like, political, socio-political, economic commentary, but it's always just on like random walls, and he became kind of a cult following.
Interesting.
I know I've seen some estimates like he's made, $20 million on it, but there's never any proof, and the author himself doesn't really talk about it.
There is the whole chance that like those particular things won't lead to a career in it. Like if you pursue music, there's no guarantee that you're going to become a millionaire rock star, but there's no guarantee that you're going to become a world famous scientist either.
Right. Don't know until you try, though.
And speaking of like not knowing until you try, we absolutely have just trash talked education as a whole, but I think, and I think both of us actually agree, that you should always strive for knowledge and education, but it's important to know the difference between education for your own benefit and quote unquote education that is being used for the betterment of someone else.
Well, I mean, I think you can twist just about any form of education to your benefit, but you got to kind of think outside the box to do it. And if you can't think outside the box, start practicing.
In the vein of thinking outside the box, people make money doing all kinds of weird things today. So you're probably there's a good chance if you have some weird niche, you can turn it into your own living. If something sparks your curiosity, even if it's something that our culture doesn't see as terribly useful, you should pursue it. Even if you can't make money doing it, it will make you happy. Part of that interest is learning how to make money doing it, is what I've come to see hobbies as today. Like, how can I use this to make money if I ever became good enough at it?
Isn't that a part of that pyramid of needs?
The Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah,
Yeah, when you are doing something that you're very interested in for money, I would say that that's the ultimate top of the pyramid.
right. I mean, that's the spiritual, like your spiritual needs being
Hmm.
met. And yeah, I would say that's pretty important.
And there's still the discussion of higher learning to go over, and we will discuss the industry of higher learning in universities in another episode. But you better bet we're going to absolutely tear it a new one.
Oh, I have many things to say about college. And maybe a funny story or two here as well.
Oh, we've both got funny college stories, believe me. Hmm.
Oh man, the freaking dorm house is great.
Yeah. But to all you out there, thanks for listening all the way through to the end. If you like what you heard, you can help us grow in a few ways. We're still pretty small and always trying to grow the audience, so if you have friends who might be interested in the neat work, let them know about us. Any boost to our signal helps, and we treasure every single new subscriber.
If you liked what you heard, go ahead and join the NEETwork Discord where we discuss all things neat. Links are in the description below.
And if you're listening on Podbean, leave a like and consider downloading the episode. If you're listening to us on YouTube, you can like, subscribe, and leave a comment to help out the algorithm. It only takes a moment, and you're helping out a lot more than you think. And with that, Dexter, I'd like to say good night.
Good night, Theo.
And stay comfy.
Stay comfy.